प्रोग्राम अज दा मुद्दा विच तुहाडा बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। मैं तुहाडा होस्ट हरजोत सिंह। अज फॉर्मर प्रेजिडेंट ट्रंप के खिलाफ जिहड़ी लीगल मुश्किलातां वो कुछ होर वधियन। एक नवा लॉसूट अटॉर्नी जनरल न्यूयॉर्क के लेटिशिया जेम्स ने फाइल किया उन्हां दे अगेंस्ट $250 मिलियन वास्ते, जिस दे विच ये अलेज किया गया है कि प्रेजिडेंट ट्रंप ने जिहड़े उन्हां दे बिजनेस एसेट्स हैं उन्हां दी किधरे वैल्यू वधा के दसी है लोन्स लई और किधरे वैल्यू घटा के दसी है टैक्स परपज़ लई। इस बारे अज असी गल करांगे। उस तो पहला जिहड़ा उन्हां दे प्राइवेट रेजिडेंस मारा लागो विच उन्हां दे क्लासीफाइड डॉकूमेंट्स का जिहड़ा इशू चलता पिया है उसदी डेवलपमेंट तुहाडे नाल थोड़ी शेयर करिए। एक जज दे ऑर्डर ते स्पैशल मैस्टर अपॉइंट किया गया सीगा, जिहड़ा प्रेजिडेंट ट्रंप दी लीगल टीम ने रिक्वेस्ट किया सी कि जिहड़े डॉकूमेंट्स मारो लागो विच मिलन, प्रेजिडेंट ट्रंप का कहना सीगा कि एक स्पैशल मैस्टर उन सारे डॉकूमेंट्स नूं रिव्यू करे, क्योंकि उन्हां दी ये एलीगेशन हैगी है कि इन्हां विच कुछ डॉकूमेंट्स जिहड़े वो प्लांट किए गए FBI के द्वारा, कुछ जिहड़े डॉकूमेंट्स हैं उन्होंने ऑलरेडी प्रेजिडेंट ट्रंप ने डीक्लासीफाई करता सीगा। इदां दी उन्हां दी कई एलीगेशनस हैगियां। ते जिहड़े स्पैशल मैस्टर हैं जो कि एक फॉर्मर जज हैगे प्रेजिडेंट रेगन के द्वारा अपॉइंटेड, आप एक रिपब्लिकन हैं, उन्होंने प्रेजिडेंट ट्रंप की टीम नूं थोड़ा जिहा झाड़िया है और ये बोलिया कि तुसी स्पैसिफिक तुसी असर्टमेंट्स करनी है, तुसी दसना है पर्टिकुलरली किहड़े डॉकूमेंट वास्ते तुसी कहंदे हो कि आ जिहड़ा डॉकूमेंट है ये प्लांट किया गया है, किहड़ा ये डॉकूमेंट है जिहड़ा ये प्रेजिडेंट ट्रंप ने डीक्लासीफाई किया है। तुसी हवा विच एक एलीगेशंस नहीं लगा सकते कि कुछ डॉकूमेंट्स जिहड़े वो ऑलरेडी डीक्लासीफाइड सन या कुछ जिहड़े डॉकूमेंट्स हैं वो क्लासीफाई किए गए, डीक्लासीफाई किए गए या प्लांट किए गए। एक लिस्ट बना के सानू सारी डिटेल्स विच दसो। अज असी इन इशूज़ बारे गल करांगे। साडे स्पैशल गेस्ट हाजिर होंगे स्काइप दे राही। इस दे अलावा असी पिछले हफ्तियां विच रीडिस्ट्रिक्टिंग की थोड़ी गल की सीगी। सानू कुछ व्यूअर्स ने रिक्वेस्ट किया है कि सानू न्यूयॉर्क के पॉलिटिकल स्ट्रक्चर बारे, जो इत्थे दी लैजिस्लेटिव बॉडीज़ हैगियां, जो इत्थे दा लैजिस्लेटिव स्ट्रक्चर हैगा, उस बारे थोड़ा होर दस्या जाए। अज ये सारी गल करांगे एक छोटी जी ब्रेक के बाद। अज का प्रोग्राम बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है, तुसी बने रहो, वेखते रहो अज का मुद्दा। अज का मुद्दा प्रोग्राम में थोड़ा फिर तो स्वागत है। मैं थोड़ा होस्ट हरजोत सिंह। जिवें कि ब्रेक ते जाण तो पहला असीं तुहानूं दस्सिया, कल येस्टरडे न्यूयॉर्क के अटॉर्नी जनरल लेटिशिया जेम्स ने एक लॉ सूट फाइल किया है फॉर्मर प्रेजिडेंट डोनाल्ड ट्रंप के खिलाफ, जिस दे कि वो $250 मिलियन का क्लेम उन्होंने उन्होंने अगेंस्ट किया है फॉर फ्रॉडुलेंट बिजनेस प्रैक्टिसेस। और उस लॉ सूट के बारे अज सानू दसन वास्ते स्काइप के राही साडे विच शामिल हैं क्रिमिनल डिफेंस अटॉर्नी करण कुकरेजा जी। करण, यू आर वेरी वेलकम।
Thank you, Harjot Bhai. Thank you for having me on tonight.
करण, साडे लई टाइम करने लई तुहाडा बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। करण, असी देखिए कि फॉर्मर प्रेजिडेंट डोनाल्ड ट्रंप उन्हां दे लीगल इशूज़ चलते ही रहंदे ने। there are at least 4 different issues he's still confronting with. कल एक नवा लॉ सूट फाइल किया गया है अटॉर्नी जनरल लेटिशिया जेम्स के बारे च। सानू प्लीज़ थोड़ा जिहा दसोगे की लॉ सूट हैगा है?
Sure. So Letitia James, or Tish James as she's more fondly known as in Queens, she's the AG or Attorney General for the state of New York. And she filed a lawsuit on Trump and his business. One thing to be clear about this lawsuit, Harjot Bhai, is it's a civil suit. So there is no criminal penalty for this lawsuit. In order for there to be a criminal suit or criminal charges brought against former President Trump, that has to come from the New York District Attorney, Alvin Bragg. So far, those charges have not been forthcoming. One of those reasons, Harjot Bhai, is because the legal standard for civil charges in court is a lower legal standard than that of criminal charges. to prove civil charges in court, one needs what's called a preponderance of the evidence. Just that the evidence shows that the crime was more than likely committed. In criminal court, the standard is much, much higher. It's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So it is much tougher to prove those charges. So one thing to be clear, it's civil charges that have been brought against former President Trump.
And what are the charges? What are the allegations?
So the gist of the allegations is that Trump used fraudulent business practices, as you've discussed. And the specific allegation is that he used asset inflation to secure loans for his businesses. And why that's pertinent is because lying about your assets, as we all know, is also relevant to tax evasion. But it's also pertinent, and the specific nature of these charges in New York is that he used asset inflation to deceive banks to receive loans for his businesses.
You know, we have come across these allegations कि कुछ ऐसे specific instances हैगे जिस दे विच a property was appraised by banks for 25 million one year, next year it was appraised for 30 million, and President Trump portrayed it as 291 million. ਉਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਥੋੜਾ 1-2% ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਵਧਾਉਂਦੇ, ਕਈ ਗੁਣਾ ਵਧਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਰਟੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਟ ਵਾਸ ਅਲੈਜਡ ਕਿ ਉਸਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੀਮਤ ਹੈ that was around 750,000 and he portrayed it as 49 million or something. Is that true?
Well, it's yet to be proven whether it's true or not, but yes, these are the allegations at this point. Obviously, we have to see the documentation, and as an attorney, I wouldn't say anything's true till I've looked at the documentation myself. But those are the allegations, and you're right, is they're not saying that Trump and his business partners and his business associates inflated these assets by, small margins. It's that they were done on a very large scale to receive loans of a very high and large amount that regular people like you and I, Harjot Bhai, would never be able to do.
I remember in 2007, Trump deposed in a case, और उन्होंने पूछा गया कि ये जेडी तुसी pricing कर दियो, because it has been allegation, it's said कि that's how he has done his business his entire life, कि ये जेडी तुसी pricing कर दियो, ये किस चीज़ ऊपर base कर दिया है? So he said sometimes on my mood. Is that a fair thing to say?
The thing, it came from his mouth himself. So, if he said it himself, then I would say it's a fair thing to say. But, those of us in New York, since Trump's businesses have been in New York and he's been on our radar since the 80s and 90s, we're very aware of his business practices and some of the things he's been accused of throughout the years. But the rest of the country has not necessarily been up to date on some of these accusations, some of the things that have gone on. His history is long in this state. So the fact that the Attorney General finally has brought forth these charges is a vindication for a long, long history of unfair or disingenuous business practices, to say the least. But one other thing I wanted to include, Harjot Bhai, is you mentioned that part of the penalty that Tish James is looking for is $250 million being returned. But I have to tell you, that is the least severe of the penalties she's looking for. And some of the things that she's alleged to be asking for is 5 years ban on Trump and the Trump Foundation and the Trump organization from buying commercial real estate in New York. And another one that she's alleged to be looking for as a punishment for these crimes is that the Trump organization, Trump himself and his 3 eldest children are to be banned from occupying leadership positions in any New York business for the rest of their lives. So those punishments, I think, are far tougher to swallow than even a $250 million penalty.
Karanji, I just wonder, there are allegations that for the same property where he inflates the price for a loan, he super deflates the price for tax purposes. Isn't that isn't there a criminal liability for that?
One would imagine so, right? If any of, if we all have businesses or we all run things, if we lie about the amounts that our businesses bring in, one would think that the IRS holds people like you and I accountable. So yes, I would say if these inflations were also used in his tax evaluations, I would say that there's certainly concern for some criminal liability there.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, President Trump said कि मैं Fifth Avenue च खड़े होके किसी ਨੂੰ ਗੋਲੀ ਵੀ ਮਾਰ ਦਿਆਂ, I still won't lose my sport. And that's something we see again and again. Even today, somebody like Bill Barr, he comes and defends his children. Children who are 44, 40, and 38 years of age, they're not children. Or can then leave the children alone. Don't go after the children, it's below the belt. Do you think so?
I think when you're in politics, you've chosen, and it's a voluntary choice to run for an elected position. And I wouldn't say things are below the belt. What his children have done are also crimes. And like you said, they're not under the age of 18. They are not children. They may be his children, but they're not children by the legal sense of the word. And if illegal crimes are being committed by people like you and I that are of a certain age, we would be held accountable and responsible. And I would think that it's more than fair to hold his children accountable and responsible, just the way you and I would be in the similar situation.
Yeah, and besides their age, they have held very senior positions, executive positions in the organization. Isn't that so?
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of why the Attorney General is going after the fact, that they may not be holding these leadership positions for the rest of their lives. And not only just in the business, not to go too off topic here, but they've held high positions in the White House. And some of them have been unofficial and some of them have been official. And once you're holding those positions, you're influencing politics, you're influencing the decisions that the country makes. I think everything is fair game at that point.
Karanji, we will follow these developments. I understand in October, there are some court dates in November in New York for some criminal prosecution as well. Is that so?
So there are rumors of court dates, but at this time, criminal charges have not been filed against the Trump Foundation or Donald Trump himself, at least not in the state of New York. Now, obviously, there's an investigation going on from the AG in Georgia as well. But at this time, I think DA Bragg, any criminal charges would have to come from New York County. That's where the crux of his business practices have been, and that's where the crux of his alleged deceiving business practices have been done. So it would have to come from New York County. And I think right now, DA Bragg is taking a wait and see approach. Just as we discussed earlier, it is much tougher to prove criminal charges in court than civil charges. And I think what the fear is that if Trump beats criminal charges, it would only embolden his base, that he's being crucified and unfairly targeted by the liberal news media and by liberal politicians.
Karan ji, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਾਂਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਬਣੇ ਰਹੋ, ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਾਂਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਕਰਨ ਜੀ, ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੇ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਫਾਰਮਰ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਦੇ ਕੁਝ ਲੀਗਲ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਦੱਸੋ, ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪਲੀਡਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਫਿਫਥ ਹੈ, ਯੂ ਡੋਂਟ ਡੂ ਇਟ ਅਨਲੈਸ ਯੂ ਆਰ ਗਿਲਟੀ। ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਵੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਵੀ, ਉਹ ਆਪ ਵੀ ਜਦ ਵੀ ਡਿਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਅਪੇਅਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਦੇ ਜਸਟ ਪਲੀਡਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਫਿਫਥ। ਦੇ ਮਾਈਟ ਹੈਵ ਡਨ ਇਟ ਓਵਰ 500 ਟਾਈਮਸ ਬਾਈ ਨਾਓ। How does that matter? How does that show in a matter like this?
So interesting you bring that up, because in a criminal matter, the Fifth Amendment cannot be held against you. That's the whole purpose of the Fifth Amendment. Anything you say or do cannot be held against you in the court of law. And that was the purpose of it. So your words cannot be used to convict yourself, is the purpose of that. It's to protect the people from being forced to convict themselves. However, there is a distinction. And in civil court, of which I'm not a full expert since criminal is most of my practice, but the use of the Fifth Amendment can be used in civil court as evidence. So his use of the Fifth Amendment to not answer questions is artful and helpful in criminal cases, regardless of what the public perceives. And I do understand that there's a public perception that those that exercise the Fifth Amendment have something to hide, because if you have nothing to hide, why wouldn't you just answer the questions? But in a criminal court of law, it's not about what you have to hide or what you say or what you didn't say. It's about what can be proven in the court of law. In civil court, the use of the Fifth can be used as evidence. So to answer your question, it is a distinction and can be used against him in this lawsuit filed by AG James.
और अगर ये मैटर ट्रायल में जाता है, does it have an impact on the jury?
Well, it depends on the jury itself, right? A jury is made up of, a small amount and small group of people, and each, it depends on that particular jury. Some people look at the fifth as that person must definitely be guilty because otherwise they would speak, and other people understand that the Fifth Amendment is also used so that your words cannot be used against you, even if you're innocent. Your words cannot be twisted and used against you. Does it have an impact? Yes, it has an impact, but I do not think in and of itself it is enough to convict former President Trump. I do think there needs to be substantial evidence in addition to his use of the Fifth Amendment for a jury to say, yes, he is more than likely guilty of these crimes, which is a preponderance of the evidence.
करण जी कुछ होर भी लीगल इश्यूज प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप के सामने इसलिए चलते पे वन इज रिगार्डिंग दोज क्लासिफाइड डॉक्यूमेंट्स इन मारा-लागो सानू दसोगे की चल रहा है उस केस विच
So actually, there's been a very recent update on these Mar-a-Lago documents that have been going on. And what happened recently is a trial judge, which is the lower court, stopped the Justice Department from going through those documents. And we believe the basis of that is because they're classified documents. However, there was a recent ruling from an appellate court, which is a higher court than a trial court. And the appellate court ruled that the Justice Department can now continue doing its work in investigating the documents that were seized from former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago ranch. But the most interesting part about that, Harjot Bhai, is that this appellate court, we've all heard former President Trump say fake news, question the integrity of our judicial process, of our news media, of anything that comes to stand against him. So what's unique about this is the appellate ruling made by these appellate courts is the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, of which it's a 3-judge panel. 2 of those judges, Harjot Bhai, were appointed by former President Trump. So it is a lot tougher for him now in this instance to say that this is a conspiracy. These are the people he appointed to that Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah. And we have seen that earlier also, ਜਦੋਂ challenge ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ election 2020 ਦੇ results ਨੂੰ ਤਦ ਵੀ ਕਈ appointed judges ਸੀਗੇ who were appointed by Trump who made rulings against Trump. Isn't that so?
It has been so. Now, to be fair, there also have been many, many, many judges appointed by Trump that have ruled, not personally against him, but in the favor of his political direction. But yes, there have been other judges who do have judicial integrity and have ruled on the letter of evidence, whether that favored him or went against him. But yes, there have been other judges as well.
And Karan ji, yesterday there was a special ruling by the special master who has been appointed to review those documents. Can you tell us something about that as well?
I'm not too familiar in the specific details of whatever that special ruling was or the context of that, only that the Justice Department can now continue its work in going through whatever documents were seized.
G. Besides that, there's another active investigation going on into what happened on January 6th. Is there any development on that?
So there is. So one of the things to keep in mind is there's so many moving parts when it comes to former President Trump's legal matters. But one of them, now let's keep in mind is this. The Mar-a-Lago investigation is an investigation being done by the Justice Department, by the federal government and the Justice Department itself. The Tish James lawsuits that were just filed in the state of New York are lawsuits filed by the state of New York. What we haven't discussed yet, but I'm sure we'll get to later, is also the legal troubles he's having in Georgia. That's filed by the AG, the Attorney General for the state of Georgia. These January 6th investigations are by the United States House of Representatives. So former President Trump's legal troubles are not coming from one area or one venue. So it's much tougher for him to allege corruption from 4 different governing bodies. But to go back to answering your question, there is one final hearing scheduled by the House of Representatives before they come out with their final report. I believe there were about 6 to 8 hearings done in June and July. There'll be one more. I think it's scheduled for September 28th. I could be mistaken, but a final report is expected to be revealed before the November midterm elections.
If I may ask you, there's a very interesting development where wife of one of the sitting Supreme Court justices, wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, has been asked to appear for the committee. Is that of any significance?
It's of incredible significance, especially because, not that we expect the type of behavior that President Trump has exhibited from former presidents, but he is aligned with a political party. He did run as a Republican. So some sort of political bias is to be expected. But the United States Supreme Court is supposed to be above political allegiances. That is the whole basis of judgeships and courts. They are supposed to be apolitical in nature. And the fact that Justice Thomas's wife has been so integrally involved in the January 6th investigations and is alleged to also have encouraged some of the behavior that was exhibited by those that were arrested plays a big role. Not only in the fact that it ties President Trump, former President Trump, to wrongdoing, but also it puts into question not Chief Justice, but it puts into question Supreme Court Justice Thomas's role in these January 6 proceedings and whether he should be sitting as a Supreme Court judge in a United States Supreme Court that is supposed to be completely apolitical.
Can you tell us what's going on in Georgia? You mentioned there's some litigation going on in Georgia as well.
So yes, what's going on in Georgia is also, a form of election fraud. What he was charged with is his actual. What's interesting about Georgia is they actually have his words on video, and they have a phone call where he's reaching out to the Attorney General of Georgia, and his exact words are, "Find the 11,780 votes." And of course, his legal team is going to use those words to say that there may have been some non-criminal intentions for saying find those votes. But the perception, of course, is that he's saying find those votes one way or another, whether they existed or did not exist. And that's what the investigation is supposed to reveal, is what his intentions were by telling the Attorney General to find those votes. And of course, that numerical amount of votes is what former President Trump lost the state of Georgia by.
Karanjit, the number of convictions, the number of legal issues that this administration has had, isn't that mind-boggling? I was looking at some of the statistics. President Obama had 0 convictions, 0 indictments. Jimmy Carter had 0 convictions, 0 indictments. Clinton had 1 conviction. President Trump, in his 4 years, had 58 convictions. Isn't that something extraordinary? And 72 indictments.
It is beyond extraordinary. I could never tell you that in my lifetime I would have ever expected the country to head down a path that we've been steered by this former president. But to be fair, I do think there were many that believed that some of the things that he had said that he would do were just bluster, that this was part of his persona. This is what made him appealing. But he was never going to follow through with those intentions, and he was going to be a responsible president. But I think that the facts and the history has shown that he was who he always said he would be. And unfortunately, some of the country voted for him for these very reasons. But is it mind-boggling? It is shocking. I don't think that most of this country, and I don't think most of the world, had ever expected the United States to go down this path where we have been questioning our very own news media, our very own Supreme Court justices, our very own laws, our state of country that has existed since 1776.
Yeah, and our own very own investigative agencies that were against the word of a foreign leader who has been alleged to, meddle with our elections.
Yeah, and you know what the craziest part about it all is there's still potential that he runs again in 2024. We haven't even cleared that hurdle yet. So despite everything we've discussed, he is still in play for the 2024 election. And that is the state of the United States today.
ਇਸ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ? ਹਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਇੰਨੇ ਸਾਰੇ allegations ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ, some allegations have been proved. It was proven that the Trump University was a scam. Despite all that, there's a huge support for this particular president in this country and huge support in our Indian, Punjabi community as well. Why do you see that?
Well, I can answer that question in 2 different ways. Yeah. It's easier to answer that question for why the Indian Punjabi community may support President Trump. President Trump has many alliances and made many public appearances with Narendra Modi of India. And many Indian folks and not necessarily the Punjabi community, but many Indian folks themselves see his outreach to the country of India. He's made a trip to the country of India as a strengthening of U.S. and Indian relations. So that kind of filters in and tiers there as well. And there are many that respect Trump because they perceive him to be a successful businessman. They don't necessarily care about the social issues as much as they do about the financial issues. And sometimes it's easier to ignore those when financial concerns are what dominates the brain. And Trump is very much still perceived as a successful businessman. And that's part of his persona, is he gives off this perception that people buy into. And as far as the United States, that is a deeper and more complex question. But what Trump has been successful in doing is he speaks a language that many more folks in the country, on the streets, at work, many more blue-collar people can relate to. And many of those people have been feeling alienated by what's called the intellectual elite of America, the coastals, as they say, the Californians and the New Yorkers. And they feel Trump speaks a language that they can understand, that he speaks to them, and that, that politicians in general do not speak the truth, do not speak a language that is meant for the majority of the country to understand, and that Trump does do just that. And he appeals to those common concerns. And he's also made, lastly, some blue-collar, underprivileged white folks in America feel like they are the ones that have been abandoned, like this country is moving away from them and more towards diversity and more towards liberal concerns, and not towards the concerns of the majority of Americans, which are white and which are not necessarily as wealthy.
Karan, that's an excellent analysis. He still enjoys a huge support in the country. No one can dispute that. And this whole notion of success, I don't know if this lawsuit is going to bust that bubble, because it's being alleged that whatever billions he claimed that he's worth might not necessarily be true, but we'll see what comes out of these lawsuits. Karan, ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ. You gave us very valuable information. I hope you'll do the same in future as well.
Thank you, Harjot Bhai. I appreciate being on, and thank you for the privilege.
You're welcome. Thank you. ਅਸੀਂ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ. ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ. ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ. ਪਿਛਲੇ ਹਫ਼ਤਿਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਰੀਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟਿੰਗ ਦੀ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਅਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੁਝ ਵਿਊਅਰਸ ਦੀ ਰਿਕੁਐਸਟ ਆਈ ਹੈ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਭਾਜੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਪੂਰੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦਾ. ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੁਝ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ, ਕੁਝ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ, ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਹੋਰ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਣ. ਅੱਜ ਆਪਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਹੋਰ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਡਾਊਨ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ. ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਥੇ ਹਰ ਸਾਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ. ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਹਰ 4 ਸਾਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ. ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਦੱਸੀਏ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਲਮੋਸਟ ਹਰ ਸਾਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ. ਹਰ 2 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ. ਉਸ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਕਈ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਲੋਕਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹਨ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਹਰ ਸਾਲ, ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ, 2 ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਰਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ ਹਨ. ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹਦਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਹੈ ਅੱਜ ਐਕਸਪਲੇਨ ਕਰੀਏ. ਦੇਖੋ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀ US ਵਿੱਚ 50 ਸਟੇਟਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ. 2 ਕਿਸਮ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਹਨ. ਇੱਕ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਹੈਡਡ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਬਾਈ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ, ਔਰ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਇੱਕ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ. ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਉਸਦਾ ਅਪਰ ਹਾਊਸ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਹਾਊਸ ਆਫ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵਸ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕ ਸਭਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਲੋਕ ਸਭਾ ਔਰ ਰਾਜ ਸਭਾ, ਲੋਅਰ ਹਾਊਸ ਐਂਡ ਅਪਰ ਹਾਊਸ. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਹੈ ਉਸਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ 100 ਮੈਂਬਰਸ. ਹਰ ਸਟੇਟ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਉਸਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 2 ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਇਲੈਕਟ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ. ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਹੈ ਉਸਦਾ ਪੋਪੂਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ ਉਸਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੋਈ ਕੰਸਰਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ. ਇਹ ਹਰ ਸਟੇਟ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਕੈਲੀਫੋਰਨੀਆ, ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਜਾਂ ਟੈਕਸਸ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਹੋਏ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਨਾਰਥ ਡਕੋਟਾ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਛੋਟੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਹੋਏ, ਬਟ ਹਰ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੇ 2 ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੈਨੇਟਰਸ ਹਨ ਉਹ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਲੜ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ. 6 ਸਾਲ ਦੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਟਰਮ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ. ਉਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਾਊਸ ਆਫ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵਸ ਹੈ, ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਜਨਰਲੀ ਇੱਕ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੈਨੇਟਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹ ਹਰ ਸਟੇਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੋਪੂਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਨੰਬਰ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ. 2 ਸਾਲ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਔਰ ਹਰ 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨੰਬਰ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਬਦਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਪੋਪੂਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਵਿੱਚ 26 ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਹਨ, 10 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ 27 ਸੀਗੇ। ਇੱਕ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਇਸ ਸਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ 2020 ਵਿੱਚ ਸੈਂਸਸ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਸੀਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਨੇ ਲੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ 435 ਮੈਂਬਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਵਿੱਚ 100 ਮੈਂਬਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਹੈ ਹਾਊਸ ਆਫ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵਸ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 435 ਮੈਂਬਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ। 435 ਇਲੈਕਟਿਡ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ, 5 ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਹੋਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਨਾਨ ਵੋਟਿੰਗ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਯੂਐਸ ਦੀ ਹੋਰ ਬਾਕੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਟੇਟਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੋਰ ਟੈਰੀਟਰੀਜ਼ ਹਨ, ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਇੱਕ ਨੋਮੀਨੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਵੋਟ ਦਾ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਹ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਹੈਗੇ ਇਹ ਹਰ 2 ਸਾਲ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। 2 ਸਾਲ ਦਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਟਰਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਸੀਟ ਲੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੈਰਾਨ ਹੋਗੇ ਸਿਰਫ 89 ਵੋਟਸ ਤੋਂ, ਅਗਰ 89 ਬੰਦੇ ਸੈਂਸਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਰ ਕਾਊਂਟ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਸੀਟ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਰਿਟੇਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਣੀ ਸੀ। ਇਹ ਹੋਇਆ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ, ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ, ਇਹ ਬਾਕੈਮਰਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਚਰ ਹੈਗਾ, ਔਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜੁਡੀਸ਼ਰੀ, ਫੈਡਰਲ ਜੁਡੀਸ਼ਰੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਟਾਈਮ 'ਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇਸ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਏਗੀ ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਮਿਡ ਟਰਮ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। 2020 ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਬਾਈਡਨ ਜਿੱਤੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਹੁਣ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਦੂਸਰੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ 2024 ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਏਗੀ, ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ 2022 ਹੈ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਡ ਟਰਮ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇਹ ਵੋਟ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵੋਟ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ। ਸਟੇਟ ਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਗਵਰਨਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਲਰੇਡੀ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਹੈ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ। ਉਸ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ। ਜੇ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ 150 ਮੈਂਬਰ ਹੈਗੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ 63 ਮੈਂਬਰ ਹੈਗੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਸੀਟਸ ਹਨ, ਕੁਝ ਸੈਨੇਟ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਿੱਚ। ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਸੰਜੀਵ ਜਿੰਦਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਵਿੱਚ, ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟ 19 ਵਿੱਚ ਖੜੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ। ਸਾਡੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਜਸਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਉਹ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਦੀ ਸੀਟ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਖੜੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੁਣ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਹਨ। ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਸਿਰਫ 4 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਆ ਕੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਵੋਟ ਨਾ ਪਾਈਏ। ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੋਕਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਇਸ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹਰ ਸਿਟੀ ਹਰ ਟਾਊਨ ਦੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਿਟੀ ਕਾਉਂਸਲ ਦੇ 51 ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਹਨ, ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਬਾਡੀ ਹੈ। ਆਪਾਂ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਇਸ ਲਈ ਟਾਈਮ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਿਹਾ। ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਜਨਰਲ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਿਨੈਰੀਓ ਸਮਝਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਹੋਰ ਡਿਟੇਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਗੱਲ, ਹੋਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸਾਂਗੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮਸ ਵਿੱਚ। ਅੱਜ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦਿਓ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ, ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ।